In 1992, when George Bush was increasingly concerned about the state of his re-election campaign, he invited a special guest to the White House. The guest was Rush Limbaugh, the aggressively bigoted AM talk radio host with an average of 12 million listeners on nearly 500 stations. His book was a bestseller. His new TV show, produced by Fox's Roger Ailes, was set to premiere in the fall. He was everywhere.
It means you're a bigot. It means you're a racist. It means you're a sexist. It means you're a homophobe. It probably means you're a white guy. It probably means you're a European, and you alone are responsible for all the ills of America. But I'm not, because I'm wearing these ribbons. Okay, folks, when it comes to being right, nobody is more right than I am. I told you the country was going to move to the right. I was right. And when I predicted the outcome of the elections, bango, right again. But it's a burden being right all the time.
Well, he's a twice-divorced college dropout and failed disc jockey who is waging what he calls cultural warfare, skewering liberal sacred cows, environmentalists, feminists, militant gays, and animal rights activists, often with their own material, culled from the 8 newspapers he reads every day.
So keen was President Bush to win Limbaugh's favor that he even carried the man's bags into the White House. Limbaugh had initially been a vocal supporter of Bush's fallen adversary, Pat Buchanan, and he said in 1992, "That was my effort to send the president a message. The Republican Party and George Bush got in trouble when they moved to the left. He let down people who elected him, and so he then attracts the Wimp 2 image." But the prestige of a White House stay encouraged the host to endorse Bush, even though it ultimately didn't do any good. During the same election season, future President Bill Clinton, whom Limbaugh called Slick Willie, appeared on MTV and the Arsenio Hall show and discussed politics with a new audience of Generation Xers. This was the 90s. People were excited or terrified. The Clinton 1990s would end 12 years of Reagan-style conservatism. Or would it? This episode sets us up for later explorations of the 90s from more specific Black, youth, and women's points of view. So, pay attention. In the second episode of Lectual Does the 90s, we'll talk about Clinton's rise to the presidency, his major policies of the first 6 years, and wealth and poverty.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it.
Jim, let me tell you something. There's going to be a whole bunch of things we don't tell Mrs. Clinton.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators.
The American population ballooned by 13.12%, going from 248.7 million people in 1990 to 281.4 million in 2000. This was the largest census-to-census increase in U.S. history, even beating out the baby boom of the 1950s. The 1990 census, the first to be directed by a woman, Barbara Bryant, was the first to include a question about living with an unmarried partner, pleasing LGBT groups, and unmarried straight couples. It was also the first to include a category for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, separate from Asians. To read about marketing tactics and criticism of Bryant and the 1990 census, check out the glossary for this episode on Patreon. In the beginning of the decade and beyond, there was record high immigration, both undocumented and due to the 1990 Immigration Act, which raised the annual limit on immigration to 700,000 until 1995 and 675,000 after. Over 13 million people entered the U.S. during the decade for a total of 31 million immigrants, or 11% of the total population, and most would settle in California, New York, Texas, Florida, New Jersey, and Illinois. Most of these immigrants were from Latin America, predominantly from Mexico. Black people continued a trend of reverse migrating from New York, Chicago, and LA to southern metropolitan areas like Atlanta. The majority of Americans, 54%, lived in the 10 most populous states, meaning electoral power was concentrated there. Additionally, half of the nation lived in suburbs, which was important for a few reasons. First, since 1960, Democrats had been getting a majority of urban votes, a base that was shrinking and becoming less white, while the suburban population got larger and grew more Republican. In the South, the population of those living in the suburbs had grown by 30% in the 80s alone. So a rising suburban population obviously freaked out urban leaders who depended on federal money and disliked Republican devolution policies. In 1990, 35 mayors of the nation's biggest cities held a summit in New York City and emphasized that the urban agenda was in the nation's best interest. The other important thing about suburbanites was that they were threaded together by property ownership despite racial and wealth differences, making them highly tax sensitive. They could be wooed by populist and anti-government sentiments about taxes, as seen in the 1970s California tax revolution. Politicians in the 90s and beyond would need to contend with this massive core of voters. This increasingly multicultural nation, suffering from recession in the aftermath of the Reagan Revolution, was the backdrop for the 1992 election season. It was the first election in which the majority of the voters were from the suburbs. As we explored in the last episode, Bush's policies were alienating him from his conservative base. Most damaging was his reluctant decision to raise taxes in 1990, conflicting with his very publicized campaign promise.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Read my lips. I lied, declared the New York Post. From his reversal on his position on importing semi-automatic weapons to suffering from a public betrayal by Newt Gingrich, Bush looked ineffective and weak to a chunk of his core audience. It also didn't help matters that his Supreme Court appointee, David Souter, upheld abortion in 1992's Planned Parenthood versus Casey. His appointment of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, as we'll delve into more thoroughly in episodes 3 and 5 of this series, alienated some Republican women. Bush's age and pedigree also became an issue. At the 1992 National Grocers Convention in Orlando, Florida, a reporter at the New York Times alleged that Bush was amazed at the supermarket technology and out of touch with the prices, hurting his relatability. The disputed event would become a political myth, as several witnesses claim Bush didn't seem out of touch. Bush was suffering without the aid of his evil political mastermind Lee Atwater, who had died in 1991. If Atwater, the orchestrator of the Willie Horton wedge issue, had not kicked the bucket, perhaps he would have better managed the media frenzy over Bill Clinton and Whitewater.
When I was in England, I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it. And didn't inhale, and never tried it again. And didn't inhale, and didn't inhale, and didn't inhale.
Along with accusations of dodging the draft and admitting to smoking marijuana before, the biggest scandal following around presidential hopeful Bill Clinton was Whitewater. In March 1992, it was reported that the Clintons had lost an investment into a failed business venture to develop vacation properties near White River in Arkansas, with business couples Susan and Jim McDougal. The McDougals were put on trial for fraud and conspiracy in 1989, and an accomplice, Municipal Judge David Hale, testified against them, but never mentioned the Clintons. And the McDougals were convicted. A $3 million study by a law firm would find Clinton to be a passive investor, and more evidence would point towards the Clintons being taken advantage of by Jim McDougal. In 1993, when David Hale was indicted for various felonies of his own, he claimed Clinton had committed crimes, beginning the media storm about Whitewatergate that conservatives latched onto. Even after extensive investigations by Special Prosecutor Kenneth Starr, whom Clinton authorized to be nosy, the Clintons were never found to do anything illegal when it came to Whitewater. But the scandal would arouse conservative ear and follow Clinton around for the early 90s. Meanwhile, Hillary's role in Whitewater, along with her career ambitions and untraditional wannabe first wife behavior, caused observers to muse over the Hillary problem. Though Clinton had become the chair of the Democratic Leadership Council in 1990 and dictated that its goals were to expand opportunity, not government, Clinton's brand was initially linked with the conservative boogeyman, socialism. This was a complete fabrication. Not only had Clinton as governor of Arkansas attacked and dismantled labor unions, but his strategists had watched and learned from Dukakis and Mondale, whose campaigns had been linked to special interests like women and minorities. Clinton sought a victory in the suburbs and among the middle class, pocketbook issue voters who cared about their wallets and the economy more than anything else. The political strategist Kevin Phillips, who predicted the rise of the Sun Belt and Reagan Democrats, warned Republicans that the Reaganomics-created wealth gap gave Democrats a chance to rouse populist sentiment. He indicated that if a Democrat espoused mainstream values and assured middle-class voters that they weren't the party of special interest, they would be big trouble for Republicans. Accordingly, 2020, weeks into Clinton's campaign, he announced plans to end welfare as we know it. At the same time, Clinton abandoned the promotion of a middle-class tax cut and promoted universal health care. This competed for airtime with probes into Whitewater. Looming in the background of the overblown real estate deal gone wrong was a woman named Gennifer Flowers. In 1992, she revealed she had a 12-year affair with Clinton, and that the affair had gotten her a state job. Following in the footsteps of the Gary Hart scandal, the extramarital affairs of politicians were now palpable media fodder that the Clintons could not easily escape. Now, January 26 is an important date in this series for a couple of reasons. Of course, partly because I was born on that day in 1994, but also because on January 26, 1992, the Clintons appeared on 60 Minutes to fight back against the bad press.
I think most Americans would agree that it's very admirable that you have stayed together, that you've worked your problems out, that you seem to have reached some sort of an understanding and an arrangement.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. You're looking at two people who love each other. This is not an arrangement or an understanding. This is a marriage. That's a very different thing.
You know, I'm not sitting here as some little woman standing by my man like Tammy Wynette. I'm sitting here because I love him, and I respect him, and I honor what he's been through and what we've been through together. And you know, if that's not enough for people, then heck, don't vote for him.
This caused a furious Tammy Wynette to write an open letter saying, "Miss Clinton, you have offended every woman and man who loved that song, several million in number. I would like you to appear with me on any forum, including networks, cable or talk shows, and stand toe-to-toe with me. I can assure you, in spite of your education, you will find me to be just as bright as yourself." As for Gennifer Flowers, she was paid by the Star tabloid for her story and posed for Penthouse shortly after. January 26 would again be an important date for Bill in the future. But for now, Clinton staffers warned the Arkansas governor that any more additional scandals could ruin the campaign. Said a lawyer and friend of Hillary to Bill, "You're stupid enough to blow this whole presidential thing over your dick. And if that turns out to be true, buddy, I'm going home and I'm taking people with me." Clinton's shot at the presidency seemed to be dwindling. During the February 92 New Hampshire primary, both Clinton and Bush were dealt blows. Pat Buchanan, a staunch conservative who made Bush look moderate, came in second place to Bush with 38% of the vote. Clinton came in second to pro-business Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas. "I'm not trying to play Santa Claus," Tsongas had said when asked why he platformed on a no tax cut campaign. Surprisingly, Tsongas won 8 contests during the primaries, including in Arizona, Delaware, Massachusetts, and Utah, but his campaign manager was embezzling money and he faded out of the spotlight and out of history. Embezzle? Tsongas wouldn't be able to keep up with Clinton fundraising, and Clinton quickly regained his footing in other primaries. Virginia Governor Douglas Wilder entered the primary race for a moment before dropping out, and the only other competition was Jerry Brown, the former California governor, running on a tight budget. He won in Maine, Colorado, Nevada, and Vermont, but after he announced he would consider Jesse Jackson as a vice president, his support swiftly dropped. Said one Jewish woman to Brown in April 1992, "The Jewish community is certainly not opposed to a black vice president. We don't think you have selected the best representative of the black community. We think you have not chosen wisely." Jesse's comments in 1984 had come back to haunt him, but Jerry Brown still got 596 delegate votes at the Democratic National Convention, coming in second to Clinton. By the way, Aretha Franklin performed at the Democratic National Convention that year. The true thorn in Clinton and Bush's sides was the challenger Ross Perot, a Texas billionaire. Perot appealed to libertarians and conservative independents, stirring populist sentiment against policies like the North American Free Trade Agreement, which people rightly worried would send American jobs overseas. After issuing a challenge on Larry King Live, his supporters quickly held drives to get Perot on the ballot in all 50 states.
If you're that serious, you, the people, are that serious, you register me in 50 states. And if you're not willing to organize and do that, then this is all just talk. Stay with me, Larry. I'm saying to the ordinary folks, if you're dead serious, then I want to see some sweat. I want to see some sweat. Why do I want to see some sweat? I said it earlier. I want you in the ring.
Perot Perot's position allowed him to eat up support from both Clinton and Bush. For a little while, Perot gained momentum, even leading the polls ahead of Clinton and Bush in June. And Perot specialized in generating conspiratorial fear about a new world order brought on by the North American Free Trade Agreement, zeroing in on the correct assessment that it would cost American jobs, referring to a gigantic sucking sound of all the employment opportunities leaving. Perot's advisors pushed for electoral wins in California, Texas, Florida, and Michigan in a bid to carry half of the necessary votes, triggering a House of Representatives vote. Perot was especially confident about his appeal in Texas, and he presented himself as the proper alternative to Bush. He took out ads blasting Republicans and presented an economic plan in a book called United We Stand: How We Can Take Back Our Country. While Bush and Clinton danced around the economy issue with vague ideas like cutting administrative costs, Perot called for sharp tax increases and harsh budget cuts, like not only reducing military spending by $40 billion, but also by slashing the budgets of entitlement programs like Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and veteran benefits. Whether or not his supporters knew these plans, Perot still courted a devoted following, especially when he called for more government incentives for businesses. Perot even reportedly had support from Black Americans. In California, polls predicted he would get 18% of the vote, and a CBS poll predicted Perot was winning 12% of the Black vote nationwide. Other Black voters, like the staff of Howard University's Hilltop newspaper, were happy that Perot's candidacy meant the prospect of independent grassroots presidential politics is no longer considered unpractical. But Washington pollsters discussed a potential Ferraro effect, in which a shiny and new political candidate has a sharp ascent and a quick drop if they don't meet expectations. Meanwhile, Clinton was being portrayed as center-right on several issues, including criticizing Bush for prioritizing the military and international issues over the middle class, and publicizing his support of the death penalty. On January 24th, 1992, 2 days before that infamous infidelity interview, Clinton made a point to fly to Arkansas to see the execution of Ricky Rector, a convicted killer who had attempted suicide and mentally handicapped himself. In May, Clinton committed what is now called the Sister Souljah moment. Just weeks after Clinton appeared in a carefully selected appearance on the Arsenio Hall show, famously blowing down on a saxophone, Clinton rebuked the activist and author's statements on the LA riots after Jesse Jackson had invited him to a Rainbow Coalition gathering. We'll explore this more in the next episode, but Clinton's decision to rebuke Sister Souljah and Jesse Jackson was a successful move for garnering white votes. It pissed off some Black voters who were less motivated to vote after Jesse Jackson had announced that he wouldn't be seeking the presidency for a third time. Next, Clinton's positions on welfare reform, proposing prison work camps, and focusing on the middle class also made him unappealing to Black voters. Clinton would win 70% of the smallest Black voter turnout in a primary in a decade. He won less than half of the votes that Jesse Jackson won in 1988 in Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Texas. When Clinton accepted his party's nomination at the July DNC, he said he was doing so on behalf of the middle class. And 2 weeks later, Clinton stood outside of Houston City Hall with cops lined behind him and criticized Bush's record on crime, calling him out for not signing tougher handgun legislation. On July 16th, Ross Perot unexpectedly quit the race and pulled out, upsetting the voter base he had gained. At the August Republican National Convention in Houston, Pat Buchanan gave a rousing culture war speech that preyed on Republican sentiments about the continued divide with Democrats. To them, Clinton, who didn't serve in Vietnam, who smoked weed, and cheated on his bitchy, power-hungry wife, seemed like an ideal loser, one who represented the perceived cultural crisis that would only worsen under Democratic leadership. The RNC would give the nomination to Bush, but Buchanan's speech stood out. After all, he had won 3 million votes in the primaries by being astute at courting controversy and publicity in a society that increasingly blended entertainment with politics. He raged against the recent LA riots, which he erroneously called the worst riot in American history, even though the 1863 New York City draft riots in which whites attacked blacks was worse. He chewed up feminists and abortion and railed against Democrats in the DNC, saying, "I watched that giant masquerade ball up at Madison Square Garden where 20,000 liberals and radicals came dressed up as moderates and centrists in the greatest single exhibition of cross-dressing in American political history." Despite all of Clinton's campaign choices, the right still painted him and Democrats as radically left-wing. In October, Ross Perot randomly re-entered the race to Bush's dismay, and Bush's campaign worsened during the second presidential presidential debate.
Yes, how has the national debt personally affected each of your lives? And if it hasn't, how can you honestly find a cure for the economic problems of the common people if you have no experience in what's ailing them?
First, after checking his watch, which made him look impatient, Bush incoherently answered a question about the way he had been personally impacted by the recession.
Obviously, it has a lot to do with interest rates. It has.
She's saying you personally. On a personal basis, how has it affected you?
Has it affected you personally?
Well, I'm sure it has. I love my grandchildren. I want to think
How?
that. I want to think that they're going to be able to afford an education. I think that that's an important part of being a parent. Maybe I won't get it wrong. Are you suggesting that if somebody has means, that the national debt doesn't affect them?
What I'm saying
I'm not sure I get it. Help me with the question and I'll try to answer it.
Meanwhile, Clinton delivered a flawless answer.
It is because we've had 12 years of trickle-down economics. We've gone from 1st to 12th in the world in wages. We've had 4 years where we produced no private sector jobs. Most people are working harder for less money than they were making 10 years ago.
On the Friday before the election, Iran-Contra re-entered the headlines, and Bush's version of events were contradicted. When the election results rolled in, they showed a clear divide in American politics that was tilting right. 61% of the voting age population participated, up 6% from the 1988 elections, and female turnout exceeded male turnout by 2%. Of the total voters, 43% cast a vote for Bill Clinton, showing that the neoliberal moderate was not desired by the majority of the country, let alone even half of voters. Bush took 38% of the popular vote, and Ross Perot, in a stunning show for a third-party candidate that has never been matched since, took 19%. That means approximately 19.8 million Americans were convinced that the billionaire mogul with zero political experience or solid political plans who quit in the middle of the race was the ideal candidate. Also, a total 58 million Americans voted against the moderate Democrat candidate for the Libertarian or the moderate Republican. Please run those numbers back if you're confused about what people were voting for. Meanwhile, Clinton did win 370 electoral votes compared to Bush's 168, while Perot took 0. In a percentage not too far off from CBS's prediction of 12%, 7% of Black Americans voted for Perot. George Bush's centrism in the election had lost him votes and support. Few people cared about his brand of compassionate conservatism. But the same centrism allowed Clinton to look fresh and pragmatic to suburban voters, especially when compared to past candidates Dukakis and Mondale. While both chambers of Congress remained a Democratic majority, there were some interesting changes. Congress welcomed in 121 newbies after the 1992 election. Half of them were under 45, reducing the average age of all 535 Congresspeople to 53, and on trend with Americans not caring about Clinton dodging the draft, less than 1/5 of the new congressional politicians had military service, and 2/3 held advanced degrees. 4 women joined a lone senator for a total of 5, which we'll be coming back to in episode 5. The inauguration of Bill Clinton coincided with a 2-day free festival on the National Mall, including performances from Michael Jackson, Aretha Franklin, Diana Ross, and LL Cool J.
Hundreds of thousands of people, throw your hands in the air from side to side, side to side, side to side, and say yeah! My man Billy won't slip, get a good grip, and let your grease your Formula 44 drip. Jump on your desk and skip, say yeah!
It was a continuing trend of celebrities sprinkled in politics, which had become the norm during the Reagan era. It was also the second largest inauguration crowd in history after President Lyndon B. Johnson, with an estimated 800,000 attendees, totally 90s style. There were also 10 balls for 65,000 people, where tickets were $125 each. Commented Thomas Friedman, there are touches of Woodstock, a hint of the Beverly Hillbillies, a dash of MTV, and plenty of black tie and sequin parties for the power brokers who financed the Clinton-Gore campaign. Disney Channel Live broadcast 2 children and 2 teen events from the Capitol. Maya Angelou recited a poem on the pulse of morning.
Here, on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, very simply, with hope, good morning.
The live recording of the poem won a Grammy for Best Spoken Word, and it caused Angelou's books to sell out and be reissued, netting a 300 to 600% increase in sales. Michael Jackson also asked Stevie Nicks of Fleetwood Mac for makeup because he lost his. We'll be back to celebrities in a bit, but for now, Clinton's image as the cool and hip new president would be quickly challenged. 1993 was a transition year not just for Clinton, who relied on novice staff largely made up of volunteers and interns, but it was also a transition year for Democrats, who had not been in the White House for over a decade. And a bunch of conservative commentators would earn their stripes during this fruitful period of Clinton bashing, like Sean Hannity and Ann Coulter. The conservative network of think tanks, media publishers, PR firms, and spokespeople had flourished during the Reagan-Bush era, and Clinton offered an opportunity to rouse up populist sentiment while he tried to advance his domestic agenda. While Whitewater was the primary scandal of focus, journalists began covering Clinton's personal life in a way that had never been done to a sitting president. The public was curious too.
Mr. President, the world's dying to know, is it boxers or briefs?
Usually briefs. I can't believe she did that.
His jogging routine, underwear preferences, marriage, and fast food and Southern food habits were under constant observation and frequently parodied.
All right, boys. Let's stop in here for a second. I'm a little parched from the jog.
Sir, we've only been jogging for 3 blocks. Besides, Mrs. Clinton asked us not to let you into any more fast food places.
Well, I just want to mingle with the American people, talk with some real folks, maybe get a Diet Coke or something.
All right, fine. But please, don't tell Mrs. Clinton.
Jim, let me tell you something. There's going to be a whole bunch of things we don't tell Mrs. Clinton. Fast food is the least of our worries, okay, buddy? Doesn't matter how much food you send. A McDLT, a hot apple pie, it's just going to end up in the hands of warlords.
Detailed a 1992 expose on his habits. President-elect Clinton prefers the stuff with fat in it. Jalapeno cheeseburgers, chicken enchiladas, barbecue, cinnamon rolls, and pies, but no chocolate chip cookies. A group of 60 chefs even sent a public letter calling Clinton out, and you can learn more about bashing Clinton's food choices along with important food history tea in the food episode of I Love the 90s. The very first things on Clinton's agenda were balancing the budget and healthcare. Over 35 million Americans didn't have healthcare at any given time in the 90s, and private costs had tripled under George Bush and Ronald Reagan. While most Republicans didn't care about this issue at all, Democrats weren't uniform on how to solve the issue. In November 1991, Democrat Harris Wofford won a special election Senate seat in Pennsylvania and overcame a 40-point gap after he made universal health coverage central to his campaign. Clearly, people wanted universal health coverage. During the Clinton campaign, Bill's idea for reform included universal coverage based on consumer choice of private health plans. Hillary was tapped to lead the healthcare task force, disgruntling bipartisan feathers because her unofficial and unpaid status meant it would be hard to hold her accountable for anything. To staffers who grew used to her sitting in on cabinet meetings, she was known as the chief of staff in waiting. However, Hillary's role in the health plan was developing Bill's idea, not choosing a new policy or anything resembling socialism. The whole thing was designed to bridge the gap between a private system to appeal to conservatives and give consumers options. Hillary eventually unveiled a 136-page proposal that rejected liberal calls for a single-payer plan, like in Canada, for an employer-based plan that would require employees to pay 80% of benefits. In the process, private insurers would be forced to lower premiums, and the government would cover the unemployed. This pissed off small insurance companies, who would be forced out of the market by bigger competitors. The Clinton administration and the DNC spent $3 million in 1993 alone trying to push the plan, which was countered by a $14 to $20 million campaign by health insurance agencies and the Health Insurance Association of America, because they would lose revenue if anything close to universal health care was established. By fall 93, 59% of polled respondents approved the Clinton health plan, but only 17% admitted to knowing a lot about it. Many who had seen information about the health plan saw Henry and Louise ads and Republicans calling it socialized medicine.
But this was covered under our old plan.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one, wasn't it?
Things are changing, and not all for the better. The government may force us to pick from a few healthcare plans designed by government bureaucrats.
Having choices we don't like is no choice at all.
They choose.
We lose.
For reforms that protect what we have, call toll-free. Know the facts. If we let the government choose, we lose.
A further wedge was caused by the arguments over whether or not national health insurance would cover abortion, predictably rousing anti-choice activists to action. Thanks to misogyny, conservative sentiment against anything resembling socialism, the pontificating of Rush Limbaugh, and the Harry and Louise commercials, the universal health care program began losing steam and was dead completely by summer 1994. Hillary and Bill parodied the Harry and Louise ads in 1995.
It says here on page 3,764 that under the Clinton Health Security Plan, we could get sick.
That's terrible.
So all of this healthcare stuff took place in the background of everything we're about to get into, while Clinton was immediately plunged into the culture wars after entering office. On the campaign trail, Clinton had mentioned ending the ban on gays in the military, a position he reiterated when asked about it in January 1993. At least 15,000 gay people had been dismissed from the military in the past decade. While Clinton said he wanted to overturn the ban slowly, it put him at odds with conservatives and the Bush-appointed chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell. Said Powell, the military leaders in the armed forces of the United States continue to believe strongly that the presence of homosexuals within the armed forces would be prejudicial to good order and discipline, and we continue to hold that view. Clinton's gay and lesbian supporters waited for him to make good on his promise. Few people liked Clinton's choice to roll out his don't ask, don't tell policy within 9 days of entering the White House, though a pacified Powell remarked that the issue of same-sex desire would drop off the screen quickly. But this was far from the truth. In the years leading up to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, there was a swelling of gay culture and depiction of it in media. Madonna introduced voguing from the thriving Black and Latino ballroom culture in 1990. That same year, the documentary Paris is Burning showed the dynamic culture of the New York ballroom scene. In 1993, singer and drag queen RuPaul would debut Supermodel, featuring the voice of actress and former burlesque star LaWanda Page. Multiple pieces of media depicted the queer community and HIV/AIDS, from Angels in America, a 7-hour Broadway show, to the Oscar-winning movie Philadelphia. 1993 also saw the Seinfeld episode popularizing the gag, not that there's anything wrong with that, when main characters George and Jerry were mistaken as lovers.
Said all that was on purpose. We're not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
I mean, it's fine if that's who you are.
Absolutely.
I mean, I have many gay friends.
My father's gay.
And now everyone at NYU thinks I'm gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Not at all. No, everyone's gonna think we're gay.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
A 1994 episode of Roseanne entitled Don't Ask, Don't Tell featured a kiss between Roseanne and another woman on her visit to a gay bar. Though ABC wasn't going to originally air the episode because of controversy, it got 30 million live viewers. There was also a gay wedding, and a main character also later came out as a lesbian.
All right, her name is Marla. I'm seeing a woman.
In 1994, MTV began airing season 3 of The Real World, featuring Pedro Zamora, a Cuban-American gay man living with HIV/AIDS. He died from his illness hours after the season finale aired. During this decade, numerous celebrities also came out of the closet.
I think this one still deserves the new and improved 2 snaps, a twist, and a kiss.
From 1990 to 1994, In Living Color included the Men on Film segment that poked fun at black gay men. Said then GLAAD associate director Donald Shuggs, "I used to watch it with my black gay friends and just hoot. Then one night, I watched it in a straight bar. Those people weren't laughing at it for the same reasons I was." Still, there were much more realistic depictions of queer people to be found, like in the aforementioned Philadelphia, and Rent, the award-winning musical by Jonathan Larson that premiered off-Broadway in 1996. Sadly, Larson died the night before the premiere. One of my mom's favorite movies, the 1995 To Wong Foo Thanks for Everything Julie Newmar, was the first major movie to focus on drag queens and was a box office success because it featured actors who usually starred in masculine roles.
Meet Vida Bohème.
Enchanté. Why are you crying? Maybe she just found out Menudo broke up.
Miss Noxzema Jackson.
Jesse's daughter.
and their protege, Kiki Rodriguez.
I'm the Latino Marilyn Monroe. I got more legs than a bucket of chicken.
Wrote Jess Cagle in a 1995 piece called The Gay 90s. Quite simply, gay sells. Noting the uptick in homoerotic images and advertisements meant to appeal to all men, he wrote, "It's no accident that advertising was at the vanguard of the gang of America, as the first business to realize that homosexuals comprise a very desirable demographic. Not the largest demographic, but one with powerful handfuls of disposable income." These sentiments, depictions of LGBT people in media, plus the continued rise of LGBT activism that we'll discuss in episode 6, intensified the gays and the military issue and don't ask, don't tell, along with fanning the flames of hatred that would spawn violence. Not only did gay people feel betrayed by the lack of protection and affirmation that Don't Ask, Don't Tell offered, but homophobic conservatives were pissed and middle-class economic voters were annoyed that Clinton, who billed himself as not beholden to special interests, seemingly prioritized a special interest so soon after becoming president. But some were supportive of the DADT, hopeful that it was just the beginning. Since 1973, the military had been volunteer only, and it was changing in perception. It seemed only right that what military people did off the clock should be their own business. Said the Washington Post, "Professional military is increasingly a career like any other. It should be subject to the standards and demands of civilian society." So before Clinton could devote more time to health care and the budget, tragedy struck on February 26 with the New York World Trade Center bombing. This terrorist attack caused 6 deaths and 1,000 people to be sent to the hospital. The motive, which the terrorists circulated in letters to newspapers before the attack, was an end to U.S. aid and diplomacy to Israel, and an end of U.S. interference in Middle East affairs. The FBI was able to catch the terrorists quickly because the one who rented the van for the bomb returned to the car rental place for a refund, but people were shook.
It was the first fresh breath of air these people had inhaled in hours, and the first time they could see anything more than the person on the stair in front of them. But as they emerged from the smoke-filled stairway, their faces darkened with soot, handkerchiefs covering their mouths, the fear began to fade into anger.
Along with the spring 1993 Waco siege, Clinton's inauguration statement that there is no longer a clear division between what is foreign and what is domestic seemed more potent. In addition to violence, there were a plethora of natural disasters. The 1993 storm of the century, which influenced one of my favorite Stephen King stories, blanketed the eastern half of the United States with snow, leading to 208 fatalities and 10 million homes without power.
There was a mountain of snow in Montgomery County, but the blizzard of '93 affected different people different ways. Edith Noltner was inspired to paint.
Just happened to think of it as a joke, thought people driving by would look and get a kick out of it.
From April to October, the Great Flood of 1993 devastated 9 states in the Midwest via the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, causing 32 deaths and $15 billion in property damage. While Bush had been perceived as too busy with foreign issues to be comforting on the domestic front, Clinton fit into the domestic role easily and struggled in foreign politics, as discussed in episode 1. He visited areas damaged by the floods 4 times and asked Congress for $2.5 billion in federal relief. From January to May, Clinton battled Congress for his budget. He sought $500 billion in budget reductions over 5 years, with tax increases, spending cuts, a stimulus package investing in highway and public works projects, summer jobs for youth, and community programs. While Congress was a Democratic majority, some represented conservative districts. All 175 Republicans in the House of Representatives voted no, for a tight and partisan 218 to 216 ruling in favor of the budget. After Clinton had countless meetings and did cajoling for the necessary votes in the Senate, the budget passed by 51 to 50, with every Republican voting no. A Democrat holdout named Marjorie Mezvinsky, who represented a heavily Republican district in Pennsylvania, had been the swing vote. Republicans chanted "Bye bye Margie" as she voted, and she lost her re-election bid in 1995. They are so petty. Her son went on to marry Chelsea Clinton, by the way. To help Clinton navigate navigate the increasingly partisan nature of Capitol Hill, he needed a strong staff. He publicized securing a cabinet that looks like America by selecting 7 white men, 3 white women, 3 black men, 1 black woman, and 2 Latino men to prominent positions by December. The black woman was Surgeon General Dr. Joycelyn Elders, oh, I love her so much, who had worked with Clinton as the director of Arkansas Department of Health. There was supposed to be a second black woman, Jamaican Panamanian Jewish American Lonnie Gounier, a lawyer and legal scholar who Clinton tapped to be the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. Despite being against racial quotas and affirmative action programs, the conservative press dubbed her a quota queen and characterized her writings on shaping black majority electoral districts to be represented by black leaders as anti-white. Mocked George Will in a 1993 editorial for Newsweek, Gounier believes blacks should have special rights. Bad interviews with senators led to Democratic members of the Senate, including Carol Moseley Braun of Illinois, the only black person, to tell Clinton he should drop Gounier. Clinton withdrew her nomination on June 4th and chose Chinese-American Bill Lan Lee instead. Vice President Al Gore was tasked with finding ways to cut administrative costs, and through his Reinventing Government initiative, he made 384 recommendations for 1,250 actions that the federal government could take to streamline operations. This meant 351,000 federal job cuts, which saved billions but further pushed more Americans into the private sector for employment. Clinton also spent his first year defending NAFTA to Democrats, first introduced by George Bush, and the bill was ratified in 1992 and took effect on January 1st, 1994. In September of '93, Clinton established Americorps, a volunteer program that aided schools, nonprofits, and community programs. In November, Clinton signed the Brady bill, which imposed a 5-day waiting period so gun sellers could run background checks. Gun sales had jumped by 45% after the LA riots in 1992. The chief opposers to the bill, led by the NRA, claimed that the Brady Act would be meaningless because of the claim that most criminals bought their guns from the black market. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms pointed out that just about anyone with $30 can fill out a 2-page form and obtain a license to sell, ship, and receive firearms and ammunition. The NRA would file several lawsuits against the law in the years following. Clinton's other policy win of 1993 was the Family Medical Leave Act, which had been introduced in Congress every year between 1984 and 1993. It assured 12 weeks of paid or unpaid job-protected leave from work that was supposed to pave the way for more substantial paid leave programs. Said Barbara Otto, spokeswoman of the National Association of Working Women, "This is just the first step in family protection. This isn't going to make a big difference to low-income families because they can't afford to take leave. We're not saying this bill is the final answer. We've just built a foundation." The FMLA appealed to the nation's 2 million military members plus their families because military families were given even more benefits. But believe it or not, there were still staunch opponents of the FMLA. George Bush had twice vetoed this act, but after it passed the Senate with a vote of 71 to 27, with 16 Republicans voting in favor, Clinton happily signed it into law. Efforts to expand the FMLA to be helpful to low-income workers have been unsuccessful ever since. And to end Clinton's 93, press and prosecutor Kenneth Starr continued to probe Whitewater in an increasingly expensive investigation. And in December, Colin Powell officially stepped down from his role of Joint Chiefs of Staff. If 1993 was slightly chaotic to the novice administration, 1994 was nearly catastrophic, but a little more organized, thanks to a new chief of staff, Leon Panetta. By this period, support for the misnamed Hillarycare had fallen to a precarious 41%. Rush Limbaugh's influence couldn't be ignored, even if his motives were less than pure.
I'm trying to attract the largest audience I can and hold it for as long as I can, so that I can charge advertisers confiscatory advertising rates. This is a business.
You're in it for the money?
Sure. Of course, I'm doing a lot of this for money. But I don't want it to just stop there. I mean, everybody does what they do for the money. If somebody tells you it's not the money, believe me, it's the money.
And speaking of money, Limbaugh will earn about $1 million this year. His Rush to Excellence videotape is expected to sell nearly 50,000 copies. And there are mugs and T-shirts.
Rush is God. Rush is God.
He is so popular with his fans that 1,000 of them filled a cruise ship to tour the Caribbean with him. Hundreds waited for more than an hour just to have their picture taken with him.
According to to congressional staffers in Brian Anderson's South Park conservatives, 46% of them relied on Rush Limbaugh for healthcare information, compared to 15% of those who read the New York Times or the 9% who watched TV. So in 1994, Republicans were planning to win big in the midterm elections, especially the House of Representatives, which had been Democrat-controlled since 1954. Not only was the economy still suffering, but Clinton scandals were threatening to make him a one-term president. In May, Gennifer Flowers marketed taped phone calls with Clinton from the early 90s, where he begged her to keep the affair secret, along with a 70-page transcript for $19.95. That same year, a bill to reform lobbying and limit gifts to legislators was introduced. The bill passed the Democratic House 306 to 112. Evangelicals then warned their flocks that the reform bill would force them to register as lobbyists if they so much as tithed in church, which was false, while neoconservatives lobbied senators to vote no, and Rush Limbaugh went on a tirade to his millions of listeners, claiming that what is being sold as a bill to curb special interests looks to us like a way to discourage people from exercising their constitutional right to petition their government. The bill died in the Senate after a GOP-led filibuster. The Republicans have killed it. They have preserved their free meals and free tickets and free golf outings for another 2 years, said a House Democrat. If House Minority Whip and friend of Rush Limbaugh, Newt Gingrich, had his way, the bill would have died in a Republican-led House. To help facilitate a Republican takeover, Gingrich whipped out a 10-point program called the Contract with America during the 1994 campaign season to rally candidates around. Newt pursued Ross Perot's voter base by zeroing in on populist gripes and distancing himself from divisive social issues like abortion and school prayer. The contract promised that House Republicans would introduce $10 billion to cut welfare, limit legislative terms, a $500 per child tax credit, and a 50% reduction in the capital gains tax. 50%? Did this 50? Described congressional reporter Major Garrett. It was a fun, popular, and largely diversionary exercise meant to satisfy middle-class sensibilities. Gingrich, following the recommendations of pollster Frank Luntz, then advised Republicans in private to focus on negative attacks against their opponents and to use focus group-tested negative words like sick, destructive, and traitors. Gingrich was a part of the new school of politicians using alternative means to reach their constituents, benefiting from the blend of entertainment and politics seen on MTV and in shows like Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. Gingrich reflected, without C-SPAN, without talk radio shows, without all the alternative media, I don't think we would have won. Rush Limbaugh amplified Republican attacks to his millions of listeners, and when Republicans won a stunning 54 House seats in the 1994 election, Gingrich called Limbaugh an honorary member of the House. A pollster was cited by Julian Zelizer and Kevin Cruz as finding that people who listen to talk radio for more than 10 hours a week had voted Republican by a margin of 3-1. Republicans also won 6 seats in the Senate, giving them a total congressional majority that was poised to block Clinton at every turn. Republican journalist and advisor Bill Kristol had wrote a memo to GOP legislators and activists in late 1993 that emphasized how important it was to deny Clinton healthcare reform, not just because it would make permanent an unprecedented federal intrusion into the disruption of the American economy, but because if Clinton was successful, it would revive the reputation of the party that spins and regulates, the Democrats, as the general protector of middle-class interests. Bill's father, Irving Kristol, you may remember, had been the mastermind of starving the beast, or cutting taxes to choke the government of revenue needed to spend money on services. It's also worth mentioning that George Walker Bush, the baseball team owner and former first son, won his election bid for governor of Texas in the same year. You can learn more about him versus the second elected female governor of Texas, Ann Richards, along with the culture wars and King of the Hill in the newest Deep Cut episode on my Patreon. Texas took third place for the amount of undocumented immigrant residents, behind California and New York. Back in '82, Pat Buchanan had stood at the U.S.-Mexico border in San Diego with an audience of white supremacists, including Tom Metzger, saying that over 1,000 of the arrested people in the LA riots had been illegal, and that Bush's immigration policy was a national disgrace. This is despite the fact that Bush had given border control agents the ability to carry firearms and make arrests for non-entry crimes. The Metzger crowd, which Buchanan disavowed, held signs saying, "They are coming by the millions and they are all pregnant." At the rally were also migrants waiting to cross the border, said one man from Mexicali when told that Buchanan wanted to invest in Border Patrol. They have all kinds of technology, but we are smarter. People are smarter than machines. We are still going to cross. In fact, as soon as all you people get out of here, we are going to go for it. Well, damn. By 1994, immigration was a growing wedge issue, especially in the heated '94 race for California governor. As late as March 1993, only 2% of Americans ranked immigration as their top concern, but increasing reports about the cost of providing services to immigrants were changing things. The Center for Immigration Studies, for instance, found that public assistance and education costs for immigrants cost $2.2 billion alone in 1990. So by August '93, incumbent California Governor Pete Wilson was desperate to overcome poor approval ratings in his re-election bid against State Treasurer Kathleen Brown.
They keep coming. 2 million illegal immigrants in California. The federal government won't stop them at the border, yet requires us to pay billions to take care of them. Governor Pete Wilson sent the National Guard to help the Border Patrol. But that's not all.
For Californians who work hard, pay taxes, and obey the laws, I'm suing to force the federal government to control the border. And I'm working to deny state services to illegal immigrants. Enough is enough.
After this ad, Wilson published an open letter to the federal government saying California was going broke because it had to take care of immigrants. California was in the middle of recession recovery and there were hundreds of thousands of jobs lost. Wilson later said at a press conference, "We are compelled to cut aid to the needy, blind, disabled, and elderly in California in order to comply with federal mandates to provide services to illegal immigrants." Anti-immigration activists developed a 1994 initiative titled Save Our State, which became Prop 187. It called for establishing a state-run citizenship screening system and would prohibit illegal immigrants from using non-emergency health care, public education, and other services. Children whose parents couldn't provide identification documents would be kicked out of school after 90 days. Prop 187 also took the additional step of making teachers, healthcare workers, and law enforcement responsible for monitoring and snitching. It appealed to California voters of all walks of life because it framed immigration as a fiscal problem rather than an issue of race. While Prop 187 attracted some Democratic voters, many pointed out that such a law would endanger the state's federal funding. In addition to dividing Democrats, Prop 187 exposed Republican divisions within the party. Reaganite Republicans like Jack Kemp saw Prop 187 as a future liability for the party that would lead to isolationism. Latino organizers fiercely protested the initiative across the country, fearing that the proposition passing would lead to similar laws elsewhere. LA saw one of its biggest protests in history on October 16, 1994, when an estimated 70,000 people marched through downtown. Meanwhile, 57% of Asian voters and 47% of Black Americans were in favor of the bill. Among the Californians who voted, 78% of Republicans and 62% of independents voted for it, while 64% of Democrats opposed it. Ultimately, the initiative passed with 59% of Californians voting in favor. Similar proposed laws would pop up in other states, and the immigration issue moved into greater prominence. Though Prop 187 would be ruled unconstitutional and never officially implemented, Pete Wilson won his re-election, and 8 federal and state lawsuits plagued his next tenure. Prop 187 also pushed more Latinos into the Democratic Party and politics. At least 1 million Latino immigrants registered to vote and became naturalized in the following years as a direct result of Prop 187. The electoral battles of 1994 rattled Clinton, who had unsuccessfully urged Californians to reject Prop 187 in favor of federal policy. He fine-tuned his approach on the issue in his 1995 State of the Union address.
All Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more by hiring a record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens as ever before, by cracking down on illegal hiring, by barring welfare benefits to illegal aliens. In the budget I will present to you, we will try to do more to speed the deportation of illegal aliens who are arrested for crimes to better identify illegal aliens in the workplace as recommended by the commission headed by former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws.
In the face of the Republican Revolution and unhappiness, he set out on what would be called Triangulation, his special brand of third-way politics. Triangulation called for establishing his administration apart from the liberals of his own party, who were easy targets of conservatives, and separating himself from the conservative Republicans of Congress, while attracting the supporters of both the groups he was distancing himself from. Clinton had hired a pollster and friend named Dick Morris, who typically worked with Republicans, and secretly he advocated that Clinton pursue bite-sized, sure-to-succeed initiatives and to essentially commandeer 4 popular GOP positions, eliminating the deficit, requiring work for welfare, cutting taxes, and reducing federal red tape. Clinton also decided to unveil a crime bill that would satiate conservative thirst for law and order, which we'll talk about in a bit. In December of '94, Clinton rolled out the Middle Class Bill of Rights. Summarized the Washington Post, Clinton, seeking to redeem his presidency and recapture the center stage, now owned by Republicans, gave 2 speeches in one. Half was drill sergeant recitation of $60 billion worth of tax cuts, including greater tax credits for those with children, expanded retirement accounts, and tax-deductible college tuition. The other was a defensive denial of political motivation and a call for a national dialogue on how to reorder the nation's problems. Republicans claimed that this was simply a maneuver, now that he had been badly beaten in the midterms. But Clinton was showing his skill at shifting his administration to embody what the majority of voting Americans claimed to want. He was Clinton the chameleon, blending in despite Republican backlash. While Gingrich would start off 1995 cocky and assured that Clinton would be ruined by the end of the year, a new dynamic was emerging. Not only was Clinton stealing Republican issues to broader support, the economy was bouncing back too. Hey, are you still here? Are you enjoying this trip through the 1990s? Are you thinking about how much information this is and thinking about how long it took me to research, write, and produce it? Make sure you show support by subscribing on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you get access to sources and early access to new content. For $3 a month, you get study guides, glossaries, and word puzzles for each feature-length episode of the series. For $5 a month, you get all of that, plus the exclusive video series, Deep Cuts, where nostalgia, pop culture, and history collide. For $10 a month, you get listed in the credits of I Love the 90s episodes. Patrons at the $25 through $50 tier get limited edition merch and listed in the credits of every video. Check the link in my description box for more information. And of course, if you don't want monthly subscriptions, trust me, I understand, but you still want to help me produce these, you can send a one-time tip on PayPal or purchase downloadable glossaries and study guides from my website. A free way to help this series grow is by liking, commenting, and sharing. Now, back to the history. Clinton campaign advisor James Carville told the Arkansas governor to think about one thing more than any other when on the campaign trail. He even posted a sign in the campaign quarters that included the phrase, "The economy, stupid." As we discussed in the last episode, the early 90s was under the slump of recession. Clinton emphasized the importance of the economy to his advantage during his quest for the presidency, and it would remain a key feature of his administration. Clinton reappointed Reagan's chairman pick for the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan. In private, they agreed to placate financial markets by sacrificing a stimulus package by cutting spending and raising taxes to stop long-term interest rates from rising. Clinton also continued the previous administration's trend of deregulation, including in consumer arenas like credit and housing loans, stuff we'd come to regret later. But let's focus on the 90s, baby, the roaring 90s. Whereas in past decades, America heavily relied on manufacturing and exporting goods, the 90s saw the rise of the information economy, exporting lifestyles, ideas, information, and entertainment. Explained Fortune magazine when discussing America's soft power. Around the globe, folks just can't get enough of America. They may not want our hardware anymore, our cars, steel, or television sets, but when they want a jolt of popular culture, and they want more all the time, they increasingly turn to American software, our movies, music, TV programming, and home video, which together now account for an annual trade surplus of some $8 billion. Only aerospace, aircraft, and related equipment outranks pop culture as an export. Like it or not, Mickey Mouse, Michael Jackson, and Madonna, her overseas sales are 2.5 times her domestic numbers, prop up what's left of our balance of trade. American executives who had long been trying to appeal to domestic youth were also tapping into the global youth market. An 18-year-old in Denmark has more in common with an 18-year-old in France than either has with elders in their own country, said the then CEO of 3-year-old MTV Europe, which at the time attracted approximately 20 million viewers. At the center of this storm of technology, media, and soft power was a celebrity culture on steroids. I've discussed the history of American celebrity in this video, by the way, but it's time for a 90s deep dive. Hollywood and the parallel music industry were old economic forces, creating and sustaining hundreds of thousands of jobs. Stylists, directors, production crews, journalists, lawyers, publicists, caterers, etc., and generating billions in revenue. But in the 90s, budgets swelled as more U.S. companies began making astronomical sums outside of the country. The American music business, for instance, collected 70% of its revenue from foreign audiences. As for film, it was the one truly international movie business. No country had a more ubiquitous film industry that exported its values, propaganda, and stereotypes. And the money spent to make American films outpaced other countries. Said Forbes, the average American film cost 15 million euros, was nearly 100% privately financed, grossed 58 million euros, and reached 10.5 million persons. The world of the A-list celebrity, lucrative to everyone involved, was an important tool for continuing U.S. influence in a globalized world. At the same time, the media conglomerates who profited from celebrity memorabilia, appearances, scandals, royalties, and even deaths consolidated their power and diversified their holdings for maximum control of mainstream coverage. Thanks to the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which deregulated media and lowered competition. Disney, for example, bought the ABC network. Paramount's owner Viacom bought CBS, and General Electric, owner of NBC, bought Universal. Open secrets of abuse and exploitation would go unmitigated because the money flow was too good. For instance, Disney bought the film company Miramax from Harvey and Bob Weinstein, who stayed on to run the company.
I do all my movies for Harvey Weinstein. That's Miramax for all of you.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky to do them there, but he will coerce you to do it.
And so Harvey said, I tell you what, go on and talk about your movie. Is that what Harvey said?
That clip from 1998 was the earliest public critique of Harvey Weinstein that David Letterman just breezed through. But of course, Weinstein and others would go unpunished for years because of the money that Hollywood generated. Celebrities were lucrative products important to the domestic and global economies, often primed for deification in front of the cameras and exploitation behind the scenes. The influence of celebrity wasn't just limited to film and music. Let's talk sports. America hosted the 1994 FIFA World Cup, which boosted America's profile in the world of soccer and brought new interest among youth. In the most attended and financially successful World Cup of all time, Brazil beat Italy. Because it was an American-hosted World Cup, it wouldn't have been complete without Oprah hosting a ceremony in Chicago while Diana Ross performed. And by the way, randomly, Oprah fell in a hole on stage during the live broadcast. In the world of golf, Tiger Woods became the first black star and became the #1 ranked player in the world in 1997, less than a year after turning pro. Major League Soccer launched in 1996 with 10 teams, and in 1994, Major League Baseball players went on strike to reject a proposed salary cap, resulting in 948 canceled games. Fans were pissed and unsurprisingly extremely anti-labor.
I think they should just play, not worry about money. They get paid all that money. They really don't need any more money. And the owners, they say they don't make enough money. But the question is, what is enough money?
I have to go up to New York, and I was going to go to a game, and now if I get up there and there's not going to be no games, that's not fair to the fans.
While baseball would eventually return and bounce back, its days as America's favorite national pastime were long over. The decade belonged to basketball and football, whose global influence had been growing since the 80s. Said a 1990 New York Times article, other than the Olympics, NBA International has become the world's most widely distributed sports property, selling and distributing league television rights to more than 75 countries. The two worlds would collide in 1992 thanks to the men's Olympic basketball team. Nick Nicknamed the Dream Team, the players amazed and stunned viewers with back-to-back blowouts, putting up an average of 51.5 points more than their opponents in all 6 games, eventually taking home the gold. The NBA had been initially reluctant to supply the necessary players, many of whom were near their career peaks. Plus, the assembly of top talent, including Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Larry Bird, was criticized for having 15 corporate sponsors, from McDonald's to AT&T, who invested over $100 million for advertising and promotions.
Hey, want to meet the team? Just head over to McDonald's for these exciting USA Olympic basketball collector cups. Some are more exciting than others. Some better looking. Get one free. Free. When you buy any large soft drink. Large, like me. All of them have exciting action graphics and player stats. Not bad. For a limited time, team one up with large fries and a big beefy triple cheeseburger, and you've got yourself the gold medal meal. What you want is what you get.
Said one critic, here you have corporate sponsors supporting a bunch of millionaires. You can imagine some bizarre scene in the future where Michael Jordan will run out on the court wearing the Domino's pizza delivery uniform. He must not have noticed Michael Jordan was kind of already doing that, but for Nike. The sight of American basketball players' clear dominance and superiority was a great boost for the NBA. 16 new NBA arenas were built during the decade to hold the growing packs of fans, and 7 were built or opened in 1999 alone, including the Los Angeles Staples Center. The money was flowing to players too, who were making an average of $750,000 to $900,000 in 1990, which seems laughable now. The exciting 1996 NBA draft brought icons like the first overall pick Allen Iverson and 17-year-old Kobe Bryant, poised to be future mega celebrities. Iverson, who had been granted clemency by Virginia Governor Douglas Wilder during a jail stay, signed a 3-year rookie contract for $8.9 million. Iverson then immediately signed a $50 million 10-year deal with Reebok. These were the kinds of endorsements that Michael Jordan had been making, but the newest crop of athletic talent would be taking his endorsement skills to the next level. The newbies were also paid more. While Michael earned just $2 to $3 million a season for most of his career, he signed a $30 million contract with the Bulls for the 96 to 97 season. Speaking of, the Chicago Bulls were a worldwide phenomenon that brought prestige and pride to Chicago citizens, with star players like Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and Mike under the direction of Coach Phil Jackson. Not only did the team win 6 championships in 91, 92, 93, 96, 97, and oh my god, 98, but they set the record for most wins in a single season from 95 to 96 with 72 victories. But we'll be back to Mike in a moment. In 1990, the NFL was coming down from a 3-year labor dispute with its players. It instituted harsher drug testing policies and began random year-round steroid testing, in addition to making a longer season for fans to enjoy, and more playoff games. Described the Washington Post, everything begins and ends with the phenomenal amount of money the NFL received in its TV deals late last winter. The 4-year package nearly doubles each of the 28 clubs' annual take from $17 million to an average of $32 million per year. Cities like my hometown of Charlotte, which was awarded the Carolina Panthers in 1993, lusted after NFL teams. 7 cities displaced residents and erected huge stadiums to attract tourists and money. Jerry Richardson selected the site of the city's first known lynching for the Carolina Panthers stadium. The profitability of the world of sports was fictionalized in the hit movie Jerry Maguire.
Show me the money.
But we don't have to look to fiction to understand the true scope of the power of sports. In 1990, the $60 million Nike Just Do It campaign was a worldwide force, paired with ads starring Spike Lee and Michael Jordan, who was also an ambassador for Gatorade and many other brands. Though Mike had been paid $500,000 per year for the first 5 years of Nike endorsements, he had signed another contract for at least $20 million in 1989. The relationship between Nike Incorporated and the Chicago Bulls icon was mutually beneficial. His endorsement of the popular shoes had a $10 billion impact on the economy and highlighted the global capitalism ushered in after the fall of the USSR, the establishment of the World Trade Organization in 1995, which streamlined trade, and the beginning of NAFTA. Labor activists and other critics of globalization opposed the World Trade Organization and NAFTA, knowing that poorer developing countries like Mexico or El Salvador, whose advantage in the global economy was cheap labor, would be exploited. If these places enacted higher labor standards or demanded higher wages for workers, they would repel companies to other countries with cheaper labor. As a result, Mexico didn't benefit from NAFTA the way America and Canada did. As detailed by Walter Lefebvre, developing countries, including previously communist ones, became important and exploited labor forces, especially in Asia, where shoes cost as little as $5.60 to make before being slapped with a $70 to $150 price tag. In the process, Nike eliminated 65,000 American jobs by relying on unregulated sweatshop labor. I think it's safe to say that no athlete before Michael Jordan had as much of an impact on the world. He set the bar for not only talent, but for sports wealth, and further cemented America's toxic love affair with black athletes. Of course, Nike and Michael Jordan wouldn't be the only ones benefiting from the new global capitalism. By 1998, 11 million people were employed worldwide to make clothes, and another 18 million worked in textiles and footwear, supplying goods for a flourishing fashion industry. Most were underpaid and unprotected, including another estimated 435,000 sweatshop workers in New York City and Los Angeles alone. In 1995, it was reported that 72 Thai people were being enslaved in El Monte, California, working 17 to 22 hours a day, and that the owners of the sweatshop were a Chinese Thai family. They were watched under armed guard, not allowed to socialize, and they were kept isolated from the outside world while being forced to repay a never-ending debt. The clothes they made went to 11 major companies that had stores like Anchor Blue and Miller's Outpost, and they claimed to know nothing about the sweatshops. The companies did, however, pay $3.7 million to the 150 workers who had been enslaved at one point since 1988. Let's pull out our calculators. 3.7 million divided by 150. They got roughly $24,666,000 apiece. To make matters worse, for 9 whole days, the workers had been treated like prisoners and made to wear orange jumpsuits after being rescued from the sweatshop. Charles Kernighan was the leader of the National Labor Committee in support of worker and human rights in Central America. He had helped expose the Gap sweatshop practices. In 1996, Kathie Lee Gifford was a popular TV show host, making an alleged $9 million a year by licensing her name on clothing sold at Walmart. During congressional testimony, Kernighan, who had exposed other companies like the Gap, alleged that Walmart employed Honduran girls as young as 13 to make the Gifford clothing for 31 cents an hour for 75 hours a week. The girls were also subject to sexual assault and harassment. This was many Americans' introduction to the concept of sweatshop labor, cried Kathie Lee Gifford on Live with Regis and Kathie Lee.
And I truly resent this man impugning my integrity. You can say I'm ugly, you can say I'm not talented, but when you say I don't care about children and that I will exploit them for some sort of monetary gain, for once, mister, you better answer your phone because my attorney is calling you today. How dare you?
The Labor Department had roughly 800 inspectors who were expected to monitor 6 million work sites. Kathie Lee said she had no idea about the sweatshop labor and blamed Walmart. She then became a sweatshop crusader and quickly cleaned up her image. Said Kernighan she hadn't a clue about how this industry operated, but now I'll bet she'll make Walmart clean up its act. It confirms what I've always said. When people hear these stories face to face, there is no other response than decency and concern. LL Bean, Reebok, Nike, Gifford, and others formed a coalition to address the issues and create a code of conduct with little change. In the years to come, more Kathie Lee Gifford merch was reported to be made with sweatshop labor, this time in New York. Gifford's scandal put other celebrity influencers under the microscope, though none decided to take on the sweatshop issue the way she did. Said Michael Jordan, "I don't know the complete situation. Why should I? I'm trying to do my job. Hopefully, Nike will do the right thing." Nike worked overtime to refresh its public image after sweatshop allegations in Pakistan and Cambodia, but abuses would continue.
But consumers and large corporations are still seeking deep bargains from workers around the world.
So the bargain the American people think they're getting at Walmart may be no bargain at all, because it's taken standards down all over the world. It's not raising standards as they promised us, it's slashing standards all across the world.
Hungry shoe collectors, fashionistas, and hoarders with money to burn supplied the demand. Also, the protection and deification of ubiquitous athletes and celebrities who endorsed the lucrative products that were benefiting the American economy became even more paramount than before. Protecting them and the multi-billion-dollar brands they worked with was imperative to preserving the economy. Under mounting public scrutiny, some subcontractors for companies like JCPenney's and Victoria's Secret turned from cheap foreign labor to cheap domestic prison labor. But more on the lucrative prison industry later. In December 1999, 45,000 protesters assembled to denounce the World Trade Organization before a scheduled conference in Seattle, citing labor and environmental concerns. Several businesses were destroyed by anonymous people in black outfits en masse, with specific corporations like The Gap targeted for its human rights abuses. Pat Buchanan called alleged violence by protesters deplorable, but supported destroying the WTO. In response, Seattle officials mobilized the National Guard and imposed a curfew as the riots raged for 4 days. Anarchists and leftists viewed the protests as a success because the mass unrest forced mainstream media to report on why there was opposition to the WTO. But, predicted a former Bush advisor, I doubt the politics of radical nostalgia will prevail in a country where the most popular TV show is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
I don't really need your help, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm gonna win the $1 million.
He's won $1 million!
Wealth had never been positioned as so attainable. The early 90s had seen a drop in the total of the world's billionaires, with counts staying below 500 for the duration of the decade. But more and more would be created, and they'd reach new levels of wealth. In 1995, beginning a streak that would last until 2017, except for 2 single years, Bill Gates was crowned by Forbes to be the richest person in the world. 1995 was the same year Microsoft launched the insanely popular software Windows 95.
It was a star-studded launch in London tonight, even if the celebrities were fakes. Appropriate, perhaps, since some say Windows 95 is simply Microsoft catching up with the product developed by Apple in the mid-80s. But that hasn't stopped Microsoft becoming the giant of the computer world and Bill Gates the richest man in America.
Subsequent launches would cause consumer frenzies. Computer software market by giving away Internet Explorer for free to spite Netscape, possibly violating the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Microsoft was ruled to be an unconstitutional monopoly, leading to a change in Microsoft's business tactics, but the court hearings exposed Gates as a shrewd and tactical billionaire businessman, much different from his PR-crafted lovable nerd image. Now, while Bill Gates' billions seemed out of reach, becoming a millionaire seemed much more attainable. And after 1995, there was a whole new crop of them. Approximately 3% of the American population were millionaires, and many were making their fortunes on the World Wide Web. In 1990, Tim Berners-Lee had been working on the World Wide Web as a new way to connect the internet, which had been around since 1983, and the first web page was written in November. In 1991, the World Wide Web was switched on, and by January 1993, there were 50 web servers across the world, and by October, there were over 500. Because it would aid the economy and create jobs, Clinton encouraged and facilitated the internet's growth in America by endorsing computer education in school, providing free internet to schools and libraries, and upgrading internet infrastructure. By 1998, there were 3 million registered domains on the World Wide Web, and it was estimated that the net was growing by 1.5 million web pages every day. It was hard to find what you were looking for. Numerous primitive search engines and databases attempted to make the web easier to navigate. For instance, Netscape Navigator launched in 1994, along with Yahoo. Netscape would be purchased and absorbed by AOL's walled garden internet browsing in 1998. Jeff Bezos founded Amazon in 1994, originally as an online book marketplace, with a $250,000 loan supplied by his parents. He launched in 1995, the same year that Craig Newmark founded Craigslist, and internet commercialization became viable, ushering in the dot-com boom. Flush with investment cash and overconfidence, internet internet-based companies popped up like weeds. In San Francisco and New York, Silicon Valley and Alley churned out a series of companies that would spawn imitators and change the fabric of the country. Some were chasing IPO launches worth millions, or buyouts by major players, like when Microsoft bought Hotmail for $400 million in 1997. However, it must be said the earliest pioneers of internet commercialization were porn sites. We'll come back to one of the first internet porn pioneers, Danny Ash, in episode 5, but by 1999, internet porn was a $1 billion industry, with XXX pages getting 50 million hits a month. So yes, the internet was booming. Up to 39% of all venture capital investments went to internet companies by 1999, which aided the overall NASDAQ stock market index. Dot-com companies spent big money on branding and advertising, even though there often was no profit or even revenue. Take for instance Pets.com, an online pet supply company that launched in November 1998, partially with Amazon funding, and it recorded less than $700,000 in revenue while spending close to $12 million on advertising alone during its first fiscal year. This included 1 million magazines sent to pet owners' homes and a $1.2 million 30-second ad during the 1999 Super Bowl, and promoting its Puppet Puppy everywhere. It established an IPO in 2000 and liquidated less than a year later. Not all websites, of course, failed. For instance, Google was launched by Larry Page and Sergey Brin in 1998. The next year, it was reported that the richest 200 Americans' net worth topped $1 trillion, and 4 of the top 10 were in computers. While the dot-com bubble would burst completely by 2002, according to Diana Palutiter, between September 1999 and July 2000, insiders at dot-com companies cashed out $43 billion, twice the rate of 1997 and 1998. Additionally, before the bubble burst, telecom companies managed to raise $1.6 trillion on Wall Street and invest more than $500 billion into laying fiber optic cable, adding new switches, and building wireless networks. The 80 million miles of fiber optic cable replaced copper wiring and would make internet cheaper and easier to access in the future. Additionally, the booming Wall Street economy was crucial to New York. Half of the city's increase in income between 1992 and 1997 came from the less than 5% of people working in the financial service industry. For the roaring 90s of the Clinton economy, things seemed to be going great. Once regional companies like Starbucks were expanding, at the start of the decade, there were approximately 1,650 independent coffee shops nationwide and 84 Starbucks in the American Northwest. Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz wanted to cultivate a third haven in a secularized America, and the company launched its IPO in 1992. 2 years later, there were 425 Starbucks stores nationwide, and the first drive-thru, and there were 1,000 locations by 1996.
It's still dark when the doors open at Starbucks, and there are people waiting for coffee.
It's just part of the morning ritual.
It's the habit of the 90s, the Starbucks stop.
Regular habit.
Every morning. It's just a habit.
It's become a habit.
And they get drinks with names like
personal double tall non-fat cappuccino,
decaf tall non-fat no whip extra hot mocha.
What?
Decaf tall non-fat no whip extra hot mocha.
People actually know what those names mean.
And by 1999, there were 2,500 Starbucks stores across the nation, and coffee culture boomed as a result. Snooty coffee shops, drive-through coffee shops, and indie coffee shops became more common. As for already established companies, their impact on cities and culture was made evident by Disney and New York City. After spending the 80s focusing on merchandising and theme parks, Disney started the decade with 50 stores. More would follow to accommodate the merchandise flowing from the Disney Renaissance, spitting out classics like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, Hercules, and Mulan. Award-winning music and celebrity voice actors brought in the big bucks. Disney's TV and radio outlets became more popular as cable channels began shifting Disney TV to basic cable packages instead of premium. And in 1994, it finally released its 1937 classic film Snow White from the vault, leading to 25 million total sales by the next year. To further flex its muscles, Disney established a master plan community named Celebration in Florida, embodying new urbanism with its walkable streets and hyper suburbia with its strict rules. Celebration promised to be the community of tomorrow, wrote Tarpley hit. In Celebration, there were no fast casual franchises, no hulking commercial trucks, no visual reminders of poverty. Every lawn was cut to code, every fence was freshly painted. Litter had a lifespan of 15 seconds. Buildings from the post office to the movie theater were designed by the 1980s best architects. In 1996, New York's Times Square completed its transition from seedy haven of sex workers and drugs to family-friendly hub of consumerism when Disney opened its flagship store. Viacom opened up studios for MTV and Nick too. Disney also invested in the ailing Broadway sector with a deal brokered under David Dinkins to buy and repair the New Amsterdam Theater, which brought other businesses like AMC and Madame Tussauds. And of course, fancy condos sprung up to house people who could enjoy the new shopping, restaurants, and services. These wealthy residents and others across the country enjoyed their Perry Ellis, Versace, and Gucci ensembles, their Guess jeans and North Face jackets, their DKNY and Calvin Klein. Klein was especially known for its alleged promotion of heroin chic, along with its iconic sexual imagery featuring men. Advertisements, especially those featuring luxury and not-so-luxury goods to be coveted by the middle-class masses, were growing more risque and reliant on a buzzing new type of celebrity, the supermodel. Fashion shows were exquisitely expensive and glamorous productions. The biggest models, Naomi Campbell, Linda Evangelista, Claudia Schiffer, Christy Turlington, Kate Moss, Tyra Banks, earned millions a year. They were no longer relegated to catwalks either. They appeared on talk shows, commanded paparazzi attention from their jet-set lifestyles, started their own product lines, and starred in movies and TV.
Heating up the runways. 19-year-old Tyra Banks uses her chameleon-like ability to change her attitude as often as she changes her clothes. One minute she's shy and demure, the next sultry and sexy. Tyra stands 5 feet 11 inches and is sashaying her way to international fame.
I always like to think of myself as selling the clothes and telling the buyers and the magazine editors, buy this or put it on the cover of your magazine, pay attention to this, this is it.
Fashion was a hardcore industry that attracted many different demographics. And for middle Americans, the clothing available at malls was more abundant than ever.
Bargains are coming! The bargains are coming! Hear ye, hear ye! The mother of all shopping crowds was waiting as the doors opened.
Yes, shop till you drop. We are professional shoppers.
When the $650 million Mall of America opened in Minnesota in 1992, it was the largest in the country and surrounded by 4 other major malls in nearby cities. But it stood out for its roller coaster, nightclubs, 14-screen movie theater, and a parking structure of 13,000 free slots. Ray Charles was paid $50,000 to sing America during the grand opening. 1 million shoppers came in the first week alone, sampling everything from Wolfgang Puck Pizza to Bloomingdale's.
Some people came just to look. This California man says he likes taking pictures of cultural icons.
And this is really one of them. This is a high water mark of where we're going.
Said one real estate analyst, "I hate to say this, but I think it's doomed to fail. I think everyone is shocked that the mall's backers actually went through with this. But I guess you can't back off when you're half pregnant." Though critics wondered about the debut of a mall during a recession, it flourished when the economy bounced back. When not shopping for the latest fashions, people were coveting surround sound systems with $2,000 big screen TVs that sat on the floor and weighed hundreds of pounds, popular computers like 1998's iMac G3, which saved Apple from financial destruction and fit perfectly in the long-gone family computer rooms, and $200 to $300 Sony PlayStations. After 1996, movie-loving consumers could be enticed by the new DVD format, which promised better quality and extra content. If you were lucky and wealthy, you could get your hands on the AT&T $1,500 video phone, or the Motorola StarTAC, the first popular mobile flip phone rolled out in 1996. 2 years later, the number of cell phone subscribers passed 60 million, up from just 1.6 million in 1988. There were all kinds of products for every budget because Americans were in the midst of a consumerism craze. Buying in bulk at Costco's, BJ's, Sam's Club, and other wholesale warehouse clubs was all the rage too. Reported the Washington Post in 1990, "I love the feeling I get shopping here," said a shopper, pushing a cart filled with a bulk bag of chicken wings, a 24-pack of toilet paper, a case of soda, and a small television for her son's birthday. "It's like you're getting in on the bottom floor of things." Think about the synergy happening. Imagine buying a Happy Meal featuring a toy from a movie that you saw in the theaters. On the way home from the theater, you might hear a song from the movie on the radio. So you make plans to stop by the mall and buy the soundtrack. If you were one of the 47 million Americans who could hop online thanks to a 40% drop in computer prices in 1997, you'd go to forums like an AOL chat room to look for reviews or talk about the movie with online commentators, who then suggested other must-see movies. And before bed, you'd watch a celebrity infotainment show or read one of the dozens of entertainment and lifestyle magazines that divulge details about actors from the movie, adding to your fandom. Soon enough, their fashion choices, lifestyles, and careers become secondhand knowledge, as secondhand as civics and more relevant than geopolitics. Claimed in 1999 op-ed, it's an existence defined by an endless loop of media, by the internet, advertising, network television, cable television, radio, movies, movie trailers, newspapers, magazines, zines, video games, music video, compact discs, cell phones, palm tops, email, instant messaging, and distance learning. Importantly, this endless loop provided endless products, increasingly suited to individual tastes and preferences. On one hand, this meant more representation and individual choice, but it also reflected the divisions in American society and fueled this global, worldwide consumerist beast. While mainstream American media promoted a celebrity and consumerist culture that improved the average American's view of wealth porn, in the process creating quality return customers whose wallets could always be activated with special editions, reboots, and nostalgia, the pernicious nature of poverty bubbled underneath. For instance, the cleaning up of New York, particularly through Times Square revitalization, would come at a number of costs we'll get into in the next episode. But notably, higher rents for renovated single-room occupancy buildings that attracted wealthier residents. Entire neighborhoods converted to high-priced condos and co-ops. Rent had already been on the rise by 5 to 7% since 1992, but in 1994, when the median rent was $600 or $1,217 in today's money, the city council voted to implement vacancy decontrol. Because landlords couldn't just destroy the 1969 rent stabilization program, they lobbied for vacancy decontrol, which allowed them to escape regulation and charge market rates once tenants moved out of apartments that cost at least $2,000 a month. Landlords made pricey renovations to drive up rent and made conditions displeasing to get tenants to vacate. By the end of the 90s, tens of thousands of units had been renovated past regulation, which in turn influenced more high-budget rental builds that push low-income people out. The sacrifice of the lower class is a recurring theme in American history. But in the 90s, the aggressive hyper-capitalism that created behemoths like Walmart, Disney, and Coca-Cola were growing in political and social influence more than ever before. For example, by 1992, the same year that Hillary Clinton ended her 6-year run on the Walmart board of directors, there were 1,735 Walmart stores in 42 states. While owner Sam Walton, who died the same year, was worth $23 billion by this time, 40% of his workers were part-time, ununionized laborers living at or below the poverty line. Studies found that each new Walmart store lowered area pay rates, shrank the area job market by an average of 150, and ultimately cost local governments more by straining welfare services, healthcare needs, and infrastructure. Meanwhile, the Walton family would use their private fortunes to lobby for changes to tax law, like trying to repeal the estate tax and supporting the privatization of education and rejecting universal health care. Though the Clinton administration could boast about the creation of 18 million new jobs between 1993 and 1997, the reality was less impressive. Yes, unemployment dropped below 6% in 1994 for the first time in 2 administrations, and by April 2000 it was under 4%. But while computer and data processing jobs added approximately 1 million jobs during the decade, most of the available positions were low-paid and non-unionized jobs in cities with rising rents and cost of living. They were mostly fast food and retail. Like Walmart closed the 90s with just under 4,000 stores, with 1.14 million employees who would be impacted by Walton family lobbying. The redundancy and exploitation of McJobs, a term created by Douglas Copeland, was fictionalized in films like Slacker, Singles, Reality Bites, and Clerks. The desire to reject consumerism and target marketing while still being susceptible to it would be a key theme of Generation X's disillusion. which will be lots of fun to talk about in episode 4 of this series. But even if you were full of angst, you still needed money. A 1997 bump in minimum wage from $4.75 to $5.15 was the fourth and last of the decade. So while there was a bump in disposable income for many, by the end of the decade, the average CEO was making 300 times as much as the average worker, while housing, education, and healthcare costs began to permanently rise. But still, you were employed.
Hey, isn't that Calvin? I haven't seen him for a while.
Me either.
Wonder where he's headed.
I've heard he got a job.
Is that right?
Yes.
Well, it's about time he got himself together.
You know, now that you mention it, there is something different about him.
Just goes to show you can't judge a book by its cover.
Looks like responsibility's been good for him.
Well, I'm just glad somebody believed in him enough to give him a chance.
Wonder where he's working.
Welcome to McDonald's. May I help you?
While the size of the middle class had grown, over 36.5 million Americans were living under the poverty line in 1996, and most of them were concentrated in cities. 9.9% of the black workforce was unemployed in 1998, compared to 47% of the national workforce. When Clinton entered the White House, 38% of black Americans and 33% of white Americans, who were 75% of the population, were on welfare. The term white trash came to greater cultural and political prominence during the 90s for a variety of reasons that will unfold as this series continues. For starters, a more diverse middle class highlighted the amount of white poverty. William Jefferson Clinton, who grew up lower class in one of the nation's poorest states and compared himself to the racist rapist Thomas Jefferson, embodied certain stereotypes by having an alcoholic father, loving Elvis Presley, eating Southern cuisine, and insisting that he had a little bit of Bubba in him. Sex scandals added to the image, along with the backgrounds and antics of Gennifer Flowers and Paula Jones, who both attempted to monetize and pose for Penthouse. Outside of Clinton, there was the popularity of white women like Anna Nicole Smith, a former stripper from Houston, Texas, who married an 89-year-old oil baron in 1994 and became a model and actress. Smith, by the way, sued New York Magazine for unauthorized use of her photo for its August 22, 1994 issue that delved into white trash nation.
And you admit, is living with your fiance.
That's right.
Here's Shannon.
The rise in crime reporting and 24/7 media coverage, along with daytime trash TV like Jerry Springer and mega hits like Roseanne, meant poor white people's stories and culture was on display, plus being parodied and exaggerated. Fox was referred to as a virtually white trash network. These discussions of class, of course, became entangled with black people, as a growing number of white people became obsessed with black culture, causing parental disgust and the awful slang term, wiggers.
If you close your eyes, you might just think this teenager grew up on the inner city streets. But he didn't. Kyle Jones is from one of the most exclusive suburbs outside of Boston.
Scholars and observers like the racist Charles Murray lamented the rise of white single mothers, illegitimate children, and divorce as catalysts of white trash culture, influenced by the black underclass. Murray said, "Wigger refers to white kids who mimic black dress, walk, or attitudes, but what they're really imitating is black underclass attitudes towards achievement. When a large number of males grow up without fathers, then they emulate the local heroes. The drug dealers who get lots of women, have money, and take no crap. All of this amplified animosity of welfare programs, disability assistance, and government aid, only compounded by racists who dislike black people getting government assistance." On the campaign trail, Clinton had promised to end welfare as we know it, and it was black welfare recipients most voters were thinking of, not white ones. During his first term, Clinton hadn't addressed welfare again because the primary battle with Congress was over health care. So congressional Republicans called his campaign promise to the forefront by sponsoring extremely strict welfare bills. Clinton vetoed the first two bills, citing them as too austere. The third version of the bill limited the cumulative lifetime limit of 5 years on benefits paid for with federal money, created work requirements for receiving welfare, and implemented block grants, which gave money to state and local governments to administer welfare and spend the money as they saw fit. Because many racist, misogynistic, and ableist state governments benefited from being stingy with welfare, it was a predictable disaster. Half Half of the then welfare rolls were single mothers taking care of disabled children or women who were disabled themselves. Complained in 1994 op-ed, this welfare reform proposal has been billed as a cost-saving measure, although in fact it costs a lot more to keep children in institutions than it does to provide AFDC and food stamps to their families. Time magazine calculates that keeping one child on welfare costs $2,644 a year versus $36,500 to keep the same child in an orphanage. But after a sustained anti-welfare campaign that had been gaining traction since Barry Goldwater in the 60s, welfare reform was a top priority for middle-class voters whose taxes partially paid for benefits, and to racists who hated that welfare had been becoming more racially equitable since the 60s. There were also black conservative supporters who blamed welfare for the cycle of poverty and single-parent homes in the black community. Advisors warned Clinton that if he vetoed the Welfare Reform Act a third time so close to the re-election, he would lose. Other advisors presented him with an analysis that the Republicans' bill would push 1 million kids and over 1.6 million adults into poverty. Despite astute criticism from within his own party that the welfare cuts were going to be harmful and protests by feminists and black politicians outside of the White House, Clinton plowed forward and signed the bill into law on August 22nd. When he signed the Welfare Reform Act of 1996, he was surrounded by black women, an obvious wink to his base that he was ending the money flow for welfare queens. The growing wealth gap was illustrated further by housing. In 1991, it was reported that 27 million Americans, or almost a third of the population, was shelter poor, and approximately 250,000 were homeless at any given moment. These 27 million Americans were at risk of being unable to meet basic needs because of high housing costs. Thanks to deregulation of rent in the private sector, affordable housing was getting pricier. For the thriving upper middle class, though, a new sign of wealth was the McMansion, which became a staple in suburban neighborhoods. Described the New York Times, the new luxury houses have features that were once only found on true estates, like columned entrances and two-story foyers with marble floors and dramatic curving staircases. They often include a great room, an oversized eat-in kitchen that opens into a family room, and bathrooms with his and her dressing rooms, double-sized whirlpool tubs, and steam showers. 3-car garages are standard. An early 90s report on housing trends predicted rising home costs and that more house building companies would be building more large and luxurious homes with smaller yards and slower appreciation rates to meet the demands of boomers trading up from their first homes. While home square footages soared, the average lot size shrunk from 10,000 to 8,000 square feet, thanks to builders pressuring local municipalities to lower minimum lot sizes. To accommodate a lower income group of Americans who still desired home ownership despite the rising prices, the manufactured home industry grew. They were touted as a distinctly different thing from trailer homes, but also a cheaper alternative to traditional homes. Sales jumped from 171,000 in 1991 to 363,000 in 1996, representing 1 in 3 single-family homes sold. The average cost of $36,300 to build a manufactured home was much more seductive for some people than an average of $119,000 for a traditional home. And plus, the manufactured homes had some enviable features. Detailed the Christian Science Monitor on a manufactured home in Atlanta. Her white painted double wide with blue-gray shutters has 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, living room, dining room, and laundry area. One of the 2 spacious bathrooms has a large sunken tub and skylight. Her side deck and neatly manicured yard are lined with pink and purple petunias. Despite extensive and restrictive rules in manufactured home neighborhoods designed to set them apart from trailer parks, manufactured homes were still stigmatized and weren't a solution. In June 1995, Clinton announced the National Home Ownership Strategy, which he hoped would encourage 2-parent households. The strategy listed 100 things the administration wanted to do to boost home ownership, like easy mortgages, refinancing, and access for lenders to financial markets. He signed the Community Reinvestment Act, which was credited with increasing the percentage of Americans who own homes from 64% to 67.4%, temporarily benefiting black people and Latinos. The problem was that borrowers who were ineligible for low-interest prime loans were encouraged to take vicious subprime loans from unforgiving banks. Additionally, easy credit raised house prices, and some people ended up in debt with bad interest rates. The bulk of these consequences would not be felt until until the 2008 recession. But to people of the 90s, the economy was going swell. In January 1999, a Gallup poll found that 70% of Americans were satisfied. 69% said the economy was good, compared with 12% in 1992. Going into 1995, in the midst of the rebounding economy, Clinton had a new House of Representatives to deal with. Gingrich immediately came out swinging, demanding a balanced budget by cutting $270 billion for Medicaid and $180 billion for Medicare, plus a $240 billion tax cut for the wealthy. Clinton refused this budget, and Gingrich refused to compromise, entering the two branches into a stalemate. The government would shut down twice, first for 5 days in November 1995, and then again for 21 days from December to January. The first shutdown impacted 800,000 workers.
Mr. Speaker, this partial government shutdown is causing a great deal of anxiety for people who utilize government services and for the 800,000 federal employees who are currently being furloughed. We must stop that shutdown and end that anxiety as soon as possible. But we should also be clear as to what is really going on here. And what is going on is that Mr. Gingrich and the Republican leadership are attempting to blackmail the president and accept an agenda that the vast majority of American people disagree with.
This shutdown ended when Clinton signed a resolution that allowed budget negotiations to continue and the government to remain open. The second shutdown occurred when Clinton vetoed the reproposed budget. The House and the Senate didn't have enough votes to override his veto, so approximately 284,000 federal workers went unpaid for 21 days. When Clinton finally signed the Balanced Budget Act of 1997, it included some reductions to Medicare, but included middle-class tax relief and a hard-fought tax increase for the wealthy. Meanwhile, the $152 million budget cuts that made it into the bill mainly impacted college students and poor families with children. When the shutdowns were in the rear view, most Americans blamed Gingrich and Republicans for the shutdown. Gingrich, who had complained that Clinton hadn't tried to talk to him on a plane ride from a funeral, was torpedoed as a crybaby whose stubbornness led to the shutdown. During this time, crime rates were still palpable compared to modern ones. And we'll discuss a bunch of crimes in this series, but overall numbers were falling as the decade went on. However, rising crime coverage through a wide selection of TV channels and shows like Court TV in 1991, Forensic Files in 1996, and the continued popularity of 1989's Cops. According to a 2006 study, in 1990 and 1991, the three major networks aired an average of 557 crime stories per year in their evening newscasts. For the remainder of the decade, they aired an average of 1,613 stories per year. In 1995, the peak year, the networks presented 2,574 crime stories in their dinner hour broadcasts. These stories mixed with the potent super predator myth creeping around in media about American youth.
If we have more police interacting with people, having them on the streets, we can prevent crimes. We can prevent petty crimes from turning into something worse. But we also have to have an organized effort against gangs. Just as in a previous generation we had an organized effort against the mob. We need to take these people on. They are often connected to big drug cartels. They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel. And the president has asked the FBI to launch a very concerted effort against gangs everywhere.
A criminologist and political scientist named John J. DiIulio Jr. predicted that there would be a huge crime wave of at least 30,000 murderers, rapists, and muggers without any solid backing. And the idea was quickly cycled through the media and would cast a gigantic shadow over Black and Latino boys and men. DiIulio evoked typical racist imagery of the savage minority criminal, noting that they place zero value on the lives of their victims, whom they reflexively dehumanize as just so much worthless white trash, hinting at who the alleged victims of a super predator crime wave would be. After DiIulio's article was published, the term super predator was used approximately 300 times in 40 major news outlets. This is despite the fact that juvenile crime rates dropped between 1994 and 2000. 1994 was the same year that Clinton worked hand in hand with a bipartisan Congress to deliver the 1994 crime bill, which had a little something something for everybody. For wary Democrats who cared about domestic violence and alternative programs, the Violence Against Women Act, sex offender registry guidelines, and funding for midnight night basketball was folded into the legislation. For Black Americans who lived the crack era and had family and friends die from violence, there were harsher sentences. For Republicans, centrists, and neoliberals who wanted to stick to the status quo of law and order, there was an expanded police and prison budget. There was also an expansion of the federal death penalty and an expansion of boot camps for minors. Rather than considering prison reform or the deeper systemic issues, said Joe Biden, it doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. We'll be coming back to the crime bill and its reinforcement of the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act in the next episode of this series to examine its impact on the Black community. In 1998, the Chicago Tribune published Young Killers Remain Well-Publicized Rarity, and the super predators theory would come to be discredited. The 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, which we'll talk about in detail in episode 6, was a tragedy that generated fear about domestic terrorism during a time when people were questioning if the president was relevant. Clinton zeroed in on the dangers of extremism and blamed talk radio. The bustling economy, the crime bill, the welfare bill, and the OKC bombing gave Clinton much needed steam for his re-election campaign going into 1996. This was the first election season featuring presidential candidate websites. After the 1992 defeat of Bush, Republicans looked for someone who could match Clinton. Though there were a lot of rumors that Colin Powell would be tapped for a nomination, Powell wasn't interested in being a politician. The Republican primaries offered up Kansas Senator Bob Dole and Steve Forbes, the magazine publisher, who ran on a flat tax platform. Next was Bob Dornan, an offensive and bigoted California congressman, and there was also Phil Gramm, a Texas senator who was a lackluster Reagan wannabe, calling for typical free trade conservative policies like deregulation. After he dropped out, he supported Bob Dole, criticizing his biggest competitor, Pat Buchanan, as too extremist. Buchanan was campaigning yet again, and he came in first in Alaska, Louisiana, and New Hampshire primaries. This made top Republicans nervous because they thought his influence from 1992 would wane if they had shifted their platform in his direction. He bragged in New Hampshire, 4 years ago we came here to say no to tax hikes and no to quota bills, and now every Republican says no to tax hikes and no to quota bills and no to affirmative action. Styling himself as an outsider populist, Buchanan was surrounded by men in his inner ranks who had close ties with militia groups and white supremacists. Militia groups especially loved Buchanan's conspiratorial rhetoric about gun rights and a new world order. People showed up to his rallies carrying pitchforks, which he'd happily sign, and they called him Pitchfork Pat. Anti-feminist and anti-choice activist Phyllis Schlafly said Buchanan was an authentic pro-life candidate who can win. Even after Buchanan suspended his campaign in March 1996, Republicans were so worried about his influence that they didn't invite him to speak at that year's RNC in San Diego, in which Bob Dole was chosen. Meanwhile, the Clinton campaign was racking up scandals that had been unfolding due to Kenneth Starr's investigation into Whitewater. In addition to the Clintons selling access to the Lincoln bedroom, there were the distorted revelations of Troopergate. Scandalmonger David Brock, who made his mark in the zeitgeist denigrating Anita Hill in a libelous book as a bit nutty and a bit slutty, wrote a story alleging that Clinton scouted Arkansas state troopers to bring him women for sex. Brock would later apologize for the story and say he had doubts about the troopers' motives, but Troopergate circulated during the same time that Gennifer Flowers was going public, and when Janet Reno was authorized by Clinton to investigate Whitewater, sending conservative media into a frenzy. The frenzy was further fanned in July 1993 when a depressed member of Clinton's staff, Vince Foster, had killed himself. Conservative pundits theorized that Foster had been killed for knowing too much, and Brett Kavanaugh investigated the baseless conspiracy for 3 years, until his boss, Special Investigator Kenneth Starr, who desperately wanted to catch Clinton doing something, said, yeah, it was really a suicide. That didn't stop the conspiracies. Jerry Falwell helped distribute Clinton conspiracy films about the couple's alleged body count. The Clinton Chronicles, which retailed for $40, was circulated to 300,000 homes. A copy was sent to every member in Congress. In the Troopergate expose was a story about a woman named Paula. A trooper claimed that she sought out a relationship with Clinton. An Arkansas woman named Paula Jones came forward, saying that wasn't the truth and that a state trooper had approached her while she was attending a convention in Little Rock and took her to then Governor Clinton's hotel room. Telling her version of events at the 1994 Conservative Political Action Congress, she alleged that Clinton then exposed himself.
I'll just put it this way, that he presented himself to me in a very unprofessional manner.
When Paula's story surfaced, it was largely overshadowed by a bigger political scandal at the time involving U.S. Republican Senator from Oregon, Bob Packwood. A Republican credited with killing the 1993 healthcare bill, Packwood was exposed for sexually abusing or assaulting 19 women. Though Packwood tried to stay in office, he eventually resigned in 1995. So, mainstream media and Democrats largely ignored Paula Jones and Bill Clinton's sexual harassment. But she was invited to various right-wing outlets like the 700 Club. Mainstream media began paying attention when Paula launched a $750,000 lawsuit against Clinton in May 1994. Paula Jones' lawyers included Ann Coulter and tobacco company defender George Conway, who wanted to increase early 90s fringe sentiment to impeach Clinton. 2 weeks before Clinton's re-inauguration in 1997, Paula appeared on the cover of Newsweek, signaling that the scandal of presidential sexual harassment was now mainstream. Clinton's lawyer, Robert Bennett, claimed he would make Jones's history an issue if Clinton were dragged to court, conflicting with Clinton's endorsement of the Violence Against Women Act, which limited the use of a woman's sexual past in court cases. The Paula Jones scandal also exposed the hypocrisy of how Democrats responded to allegations of sexual harassment against Clarence Thomas versus Clinton. While Clinton maneuvered around Paula Jones and Gennifer Flowers, who we'll hear from again later in the series, their allegations solidified a pattern in the public perception about Clinton's behavior. But for now, the comeback kid was safe. Despite the sex scandals like needing to fire his campaign manager Dick Morris for sleeping with a sex worker, unethical financial contributions from people to sleep in the Lincoln bedroom, and the conspiracy theories circulating about Troopergate, Whitewater, and murders, Clinton easily demolished Bob Dole and Ross Perot in 1996, taking 49.2% of the popular vote. However, it must be emphasized that voter turnout in 1996 was only 51.7% of eligible voters, the lowest for a presidential election since 1948. This is despite the fact that 5 million new voters were registered as a result of the motor voter registration law that required DMVs to provide voter registration. As for black voters, less than 1/2 of us participated. For those who did vote, Clinton touted the sparkly benefits of his economic agenda and leaned into cultural values that obscured the dark side of the economy. Polls showed he improved his relationship with liberal Republicans, liberal independents, and moderate independents, showing the power of his triangulation strategy. 2/3 of people polled after voting showed that they held 73-year-old Bob Dole's age against him. Dole's chances had also been hurt by Newt Gingrich's inability to compromise, with many Americans remembering the government shutdown, which had been mostly blamed on Republicans, in the voting booth. Dole's potential votes were also taken by Ross Perot, who couldn't top his 1992 performance, but scraped 8% of the popular vote, again drawing from Democrats and Republicans equally. When it became clear to Bob Dole that he was losing to Clinton, he accused Democrats of flooding the country with immigrants with criminal records to vote, zeroing in on a budding electoral hot topic for Republicans in the years to come. Ultimately, Clinton beat Dole 379 to 159 in the Electoral College. Faced with 4 more years to possibly push through a health care bill, the Clinton administration was excited. So were conservative media outlets and pundits, whose anti-Clinton programming made for big bucks. Right-wing culture wasn't going anywhere. Clinton was never poised to be a radical or even left-leaning. He always presented as a middle-of-the-road Democrat, willing to bend to the right to maintain power and achieve moderate change domestically, while continuing to be an imperialist abroad. From his early squashing of trade unions in Arkansas, it was always clear that he was a neoliberal. His policy of deregulation, like banking reform in 1999 that we come back to in the series finale, would continue. But what makes his presidency so much worse in retrospect was the pattern of sexual harassment and allegations of assault that trailed him. The astute nickname Slick Willie and call-outs by the sinister Rush Limbaugh is what compounds the Clinton legacy. The wrong people were being honest about Clinton, and Democrat silence on his behavior allowed conspiracy theories to flourish and fester stories worse than the truth. Depending on who you ask, he wasn't the worst thing to happen to America when viewed next to his contemporaries. But even more importantly, he was a reflection of American rape culture, politics, politics and a shining example of the cracks in the American veneer of a progressiveness and unity. It's also important to note, though, that Clinton, like every successful candidate, was a reflection of many of the people who voted for him. Moderate, imperialist, money-focused. The priorities of mainstream politics were clear. The middle class had been growing in importance for decades, but their electoral power was abundant in the 90s. More minorities than ever before were joining middle-class ranks, and they spread their wings. There were more minorities in suburbs, with the sharpest increase among Latinos. And in fact, some suburbs would grow so large that they became small cities, lowering the overall growth rate of suburbs. Fleeing color and changing suburbs, a significant portion of white Americans were moving to the Pacific Northwest and back to cities, especially to growing ones down south, where Sunbelt politics reigned supreme. It is not just white flight, but also flight away from expensive suburbs and congestion and urbanism, wrote demographer William H. Frey. The changing demographics would exacerbate and shape responses to social trends, LGBT issues, and women, as we'll see. But next, it's time to explore the Black community in the 1990s. How would various topics from this episode, wealth, poverty, crime, celebrity, etc., impact the Black community? I can't wait for us to talk about it in the next episode of Lectual Does the 90s. If you're enjoying this series, make sure you become a patron for early access, sources, and extra content. Check out the free companion series, I Love the 90s, featuring deep dives on 90s Christmas, food history, true crime, and more upcoming topics. For $25 and up a month on my Patreon, you get listed in the credits of every 90s related video. For $10 and up a month, you get listed in the credits of I Love the 90s. And for $5 and up a month, you get access to the exclusive companion series Deep Cuts, which focuses on regional history that will take you even further into the 90s. In the latest Deep Cut, we talk about Texas history, including King of the Hill, Ann Richards, Selena, and more. For $3 and up, you get a downloadable glossary for every episode that provides definitions and short biographies. Click the link in my description box to get started. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you like and subscribe.